Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you can see us all. So welcome to this webinar. My name is Paul Craig. I'm the CTO here at Norm. And today I'll be working with our Fortinet team, our Fortinet colleague, Chris Roberts. Chris, do you want to just quickly introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone on the webinar, and obviously in the room with us here in London. My name is Chris Roberts. I'm a business development manager assigned to the security operations capabilities that Fortinet have, which effectively translates to everything related to advanced threat detection and prevention, and also visibility and automation. And we work a lot with Norm as they use our solutions to bring managed services to their customer base.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Chris. So for the next 45 minutes or so, what we'd like to do is just run through the key cybersecurity trends and the necessary defensive blends that we see forward for the year 2023. If anyone does have any questions in the room, please interject. Anyone has any questions on the webinar and the remote session, if you can pop that into the chat, please, and then we'll pick them up as we go. Okay, so moving forward, the 6 cybersecurity trends that you can expect through 2023. The first one, which a bit of an unusual one for a cybersecurity theme, is a privacy first approach to information security. Here in the UK, we're actually quite lucky and blessed that we've had GDPR with us now since 2019, so we are aware of what privacy first for an organisation means. But globally, that's now starting to pick up momentum as well. So we're seeing more and more countries adopting a privacy first legislation. And we're seeing those countries also, making concerted efforts towards the harmonisation of information privacy and data regulations, which I think is absolutely imperative if globally we want to ensure there's a level of commonality and sharing of data between countries and organisations. Unsurprisingly, more and more organisations are looking to outsource cybersecurity operations through 2023. And this is really pivoted around the increasing level of complexity within an organisation's IT stack. Digital transformations are moving forward at an accelerated pace, especially since COVID. Couple that with the inherent skills shortage that we're seeing across the globe, and the fact that the threat landscape is constantly evolving as well at the end of the day. A big one, this one was here last year as well, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, is ransomware. So there's a big trend in the market that ransomware is here to stay, at least for the next 12 months and beyond. What we are seeing is a shift from the double ransomware approach that used to be done, where files were encrypted and then asked for a ransom and then an extortion, to just a simple extortion now. So the cyber criminals are getting slightly lazier, just taking the data and then just demanding a cache of sum. The other thing that is also accelerating ransomware and its proliferation within the wild is the whole cybercrime as a service. So this is where you can go off and buy certain elements of the attack chain and build those together. So before, where it was, you had a very deterministic attack path because a certain APT group would use a certain attack path. That has completely gone out of the windows now. So the idea being is that you can buy elements of that service and glue it together yourselves. The other one is enterprise misinformation attacks, which is basically social engineering on steroids. And this is leveraging the use of deepfakes. Zero trust is a big trend that we expect to really gain momentum over the next 12 months. Zero trust as an architecture has been around now for a good 5 years plus. But now what we're seeing, especially on the back of COVID and the evolving remote working trends, is VPNs aren't simply cutting it from an infrastructure perspective. So adopting a zero trust, where you never trust the infrastructure and always verify, will gain momentum over the next 12 months. And the last one, which is a subject which has been around now for at least a good 24 months is cyber insurance. I think if anyone's tried to secure cyber insurance over the past 12 months, you've all noticed insurance premiums have just rocketed. That's normally coupled with a level of reduced coverage as well. And certain organisations are finding it more difficult to obtain and afford at the end of the day. So from a privacy first approach, our view with adopting a privacy first approach is actually it's really good for the organisation. One organisation that has absolutely capitalised on the privacy first approach is Apple. So there's a little gift, a little image there which talks around Apple's approach to privacy. But actually, privacy first really begins at home. So people think about privacy and PII data as being that of your customers, and typically affects B2C organisations. But actually, every single organisation has an inherent duty of care because we all have employees within our organisation. So employee data is absolutely paramount. I don't know if you follow the news of the media, but obviously Interserve had a large breach last year, tail end of last year, and a very hefty fine associated with that, and that was around their own employee data. Now, there are other factors around that as well, but employee data is absolutely empirical. And I think the other thing as well with IT and how quickly IT evolves and the whole concept of shadow IT is just understanding where is your data. From a marketing perspective, it's so easy these days to spin up campaigns using third-party SaaS platforms. Well, you're collecting people's personal data at the end of the day. So privacy first, privacy begins at home at the end of the day. Understand where your data is and make sure you've got the adequate controls around your employee data, even if that employee data is in a third-party SaaS platform as well at the end of the day. Earning your customers' trust. And again, customers can be the end user, the consumers of the world, or other business. Organizations are now looking to work with organizations that have a trust first approach and a policy, and it's far from just a regulatory obligation. It actually will engage and endear trust from the end users and other businesses as well. Important to in this, and in fact important in any cybersecurity or privacy program, is ensure that you secure executive support. So it's a top-down approach at the end of the day. And like most times when we're talking to the exec team, make sure we focus on both the qualitative and the quantitative benefits. So this is more than just a natural need for compliance. It actually does give your organisation a competitive edge as you move forward. As more and more organisations are adopting a privacy first approach, we're seeing more of them adopting internationally recognised frameworks as well, so to actually be able to credentialise the work and the effort they're taking internally within the organisation. Traditionally, they pivot around two key elements. So it's either ISO 27001 from an information security framework, which most of us know and love, and the recently added sister or daughter of ISO 27001, which is 27701, which is the PIM framework, which sits on top of that as well. And also making sure that as an organisation, we prepare for tomorrow's regulatory environment. Now, as I've said, here in the UK and across the EU, we're most probably one, if not two steps ahead with a GDPR perspective. So the GDPR is kind of being held as being the de facto or the gold standard for privacy support, and we are seeing more and more countries starting to adopt that. But as with most things in IT, information security, cybersecurity, prepare for a rapidly changing and dynamic environment. And if you'd like to know any more, then come and have a conversation with us and work with one of our privacy experts to help you build a robust privacy first strategy. Moving forward to outsourcing cybersecurity operations, some of the key points around here is, if you are going to manage your cybersecurity risk, then you need to be making sure that you are doing that on a 24/7 basis all year. As I'm sure we all know, unfortunately, the bad guys don't sleep. So only having core hours coverage actually doesn't work. The benefit of having true 24/7 coverage is you've got the ability to identify, respond, and to react to threats as and when they occur within your organization. Outsourcing that obviously makes sense. You also have the inherent cost-effective nature of outsourcing the service. If you're trying to build this internally yourselves, not only do you have the cost of the tools, the systems, the processes, etc., you also have the human cost as well. So outsourcing tends to be a materially cost-effective approach, and it's also predictable OPEX cost. So when you're selling this to our friends in finance, making sure they've got a predictable OPEX model that they can work with tends to be how these guys like to move. So, but it is a shift from a CapEx to a more OPEX-based approach at the end of the day. Using an MSSP also means that the organisation has a quicker path to cybersecurity maturity, and the reason being is an MSSP will have helped other organisations previously to take those steps, so they've got a common, well-defined route to success. You also have the ability to access a broader level of experience and skills within an MSSP than you would be able to attract internally yourselves. That skill set within the MSSP also has the aggregate knowledge that they have derived from working with multiple different customers in multiple different segments, in multiple different verticals as well. So you're seeing threats as they happen out in the wild. It also allows you to take a threat intelligence-led approach to cybersecurity, so sort of really to become proactive with the service that you receive. And again, you've got the breadth and the depth of the technical and subject domain knowledge within an MSSP today. The other benefit is access to advanced technology. So an MSSP will normally look to quicker adopt emerging technologies. And because it's empirical to the way that they deliver those services, because it's an outcome-based service that the MSSP will be delivering, those services are naturally integrated into their proposition and into their service stack day one. You also get the benefits of other technologies, again, such as threat intelligence and SOAR, security orchestration and automated response, built into an MSSP's tech stack today. Most importantly, it allows the business to focus on what it needs to do and align its technical resources to drive the business forward and drive revenue back into the organisation. Some stats that I pulled from our SOC from this morning. So a day of life in the norm SOC. We have circa 872, just shy of 900 devices under active management today. Over 20,000 endpoints, and across those devices we're ingesting around about 1.5 billion logs per day. That then whittles down to around about 1,500 alerts per day, and then off of the back of those alerts we raise on average 7 to 8 incidents out to our customers on a daily basis. So actually a lot of the work that the MSSP does is giving you the ability to see the woods through the trees. So you've got a massive amount of data that you're ingesting that then gets whittled down through the triage phase down to your alerts, and then only escalate or engage the customer on those incidents that require further analytical or investigatory matters. From a cybersecurity maturity perspective, as I said, most organizations today from a cybersecurity maturity are sitting between levels 1 and 2 on average across the UK, and by adopting an MSSP that's quickly accelerated over to 4 to a 5 at the end of the day. And I think what's really important when you're looking at cybersecurity maturity is not just to focus on the technology. Appreciate we're sat in Fortinet's offices today, but actually, people and process are imperative when you're building a robust cybersecurity maturity model at the end of the day. Ultimately, the biggest risk within any organisation is also your greatest asset. It's the people. It's the soft, squishy interface between the keyboard and the chair at the end of the day. So making sure you've got a policy and a program that looks at your people, your processes and your technology holistically is absolutely imperative. I'll hand over to Chris.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of, by the way, apologies, what we're trying to clearly do here is optimize visibility of the camera whilst also engaging with the audience that have made it into London office. So yeah, I think, you know, in terms of what our Fortinet seeing, we've got over 500 people that comprise the FortiGuard division of Fortinet, which effectively is the provider of the security intelligence that makes our solutions do what they're supposed to do. And so I've just picked out some sort of individual items to sort of set the scene, if you like, and drive some additional context beyond what Paul's been talking through, and just to sort of focus on some of the points that Paul's made. You know, the whole concept of automation and orchestration, the tool sets that Norm are using to offer managed services. On one hand, as Paul has rightly said, it enables organizations to focus on the individual business for which that organization exists for. It also, though, enables Norm to create services that are at price points that are justifiable, which goes back to Paul's point about predictable OPEX. You know, if Paul's and the Norm business weren't, for example, using the automation capability that Fortinet have within our source solution, then clearly there would be more squishy layer 8 interfaces, as I love to call them, that would need to do more manual work, and that would ultimately drive the cost base up. So I think, you know, automation is a huge important part of a managed service provider's arsenal of tools, because at the end of the day, it simply makes the services that they build more cost effective and therefore attractive to the audience that they're servicing. So the state of the nation, I want to pick a couple of items out here to, I guess, focus the mind. Let's talk about the Realtek system on a chip vulnerability first. Now, this was announced at DEF CON. It was in Q4 last year from memory. And the reason I felt this was worth calling out is that it was a vulnerability on the software code that was on the system on a chip that manufacturer, with no disrespect intended, made available for purchase to other manufacturers to then design the likes of internet connected routers. And what does that therefore translate to? That translates to there are millions and millions of devices worldwide that are using the software from that manufacturer on the third-party manufacturer's physical device that will most likely remain vulnerable for a fairly long period of time, if not forever, until that device is actually replaced. Because although the manufacturer that designed the system on a chip made updated code available to fix the vulnerability, they were then reliant upon the third-party manufacturers to package that fix up and then publicize to their users that there is a new version of code. But you know, for the people within the room right now, you know, hands up who's patched their home router in the last year. Okay, well, yeah. Me too, because I used to use FortiGate. But yeah, this is the thing, is that, you know, we treat things like our home internet router as a commoditized appliance just as much as we would treat the fridge or the washing machine or the dishwasher. It is a service provider to us when we're using it as a consumer at home. So we don't think generally, I mean, people in this room probably will think, but generally speaking, the average public will not think of patching their home router. And to be fair, now we're in a world where you should probably start thinking about patching your washing machine and your dishwasher, because of course now we've got connected devices of that ilk at home. And so that's the challenge that of course we now hit, because although this is very much focused on the likes of home users, the reality is on a home users network, what do we find? We find corporate assets. We find, well, you know, we find laptops that are provided by the business to be used in a hybrid work environment. And if an attacker can utilize the sort of vulnerability that exists in that example and get onto someone's home network, the first thing they're going to do is profile that home network, find the corporate asset, and see whether it's vulnerable. And that ultimately is the risk. You know, we have to treat all networks as potentially risky, which goes back to Paul's point about, you know, we're seeing a dramatic uptake in zero trust, the whole concept of least privilege, sort of branded as zero trust. to enable organizations to quantify their risk and control their risk in a much more supportable, repeatable way. Call out another one, Lightning Stealer. This was a piece of malware that was in the first half of last year, to be fair, but as an example, this is happening all the time. So this particular piece of malware, if it was successful on getting onto an endpoint, it would attack pretty much every browser you can think of. And again, it plays the psychology, because we will all generally, I would bet, we will all pick a browser based upon our perception of privacy, speed, look and feel, brand reputation, etc., etc. You know, we'll go to Firefox, we'll go to Chrome, we'll go to Edge. Thank goodness they've deprecated Internet Explorer now. You know, we'll go to Safari, and we'll pick them based on the fact we think that in general terms, oh, that feels like a safe place to browse from. But of course, attackers don't care. It goes back to Paul's point that, you know, they never sleep. They drink a lot of coffee, I would imagine. But the reality is that the attackers are using code that goes after every and all browsers. And in this particular example, it went after Firefox and anything that was based on the Chromium project, which is pretty much all the other browsers I mentioned. And what did it do when it achieved successful infection? It stole a lot of personal data. It stole bookmarks. It stole browsing history. You know, it went after crypto assets if it could find them, etc., etc., etc. And that, of course, causes a huge problem, because if that data is successfully exfiltrated, the risk of identity theft clearly skyrockets for the individuals that are targeted. So the point really being that it doesn't matter what we pick, whether it's, you know, what piece of software we pick, whether it's a browser, it doesn't matter what it is, personal productivity, they are all going to be attacked by hackers, because of course, once you reach a certain level of installation, you reach a certain level of attractiveness for an attacker, and therefore they're going to focus on it. To call out the picture with a little sort of redacted white oblong, that is an example of a malware as a service dashboard. And the point here being that we've now crossed over 8 billion people on the planet, and many of those have got internet connectivity. Many of those have got internet devices. And this is an example of a software as a service that's available to people with maybe a lack of morals, a desire to earn money quickly as possible without maybe doing much work, and a credit card that maybe they've stolen and they can put $200 a month on. And that gives them a tool set that allows them to create customized ransomware, customized malware, and then they can deliver that to their intended audience, their intended recipients. And then there's a revenue sharing model in place where the creators of the malware as a service, the creators of a ransomware as a service, will take a portion of the profits. Now, again, we're talking criminals here in general terms. So the revenue sharing, we have seen examples where some of the criminal groups disagreed with the revenue sharing and ended up sort of jumping in at the last minute and taking 100%. But so they don't necessarily abide by their own rules. Point being, it dramatically expands the availability of attackers, because it allows people with no skill sets, but with a basic concept of how to use a computer, it allows those people to create valid, viable attacks for their intended audience. And that's ultimately the challenge. You know, we've got a dramatically increased capability for, as I said, people with maybe a lack of morals to attack the rest of the world. And again, I think that further reinforces one of Paul's earlier points, that whilst a business might not itself operate on a 24/7, 365 basis, if it maintains any level of internet presence or internet connectivity across that business, it needs to protect itself 24/7, 365. And the final item, which is worth mentioning, is that delivery chain. Now, the only reason for putting this up there is to illustrate the complexity of the way that attackers are building their attack code now. And the point really I'm trying to illustrate with this particular picture here is that if at first you don't succeed, try again, is the adage with which attackers are absolutely designing their software with. So they will find multiple ways and they will attack multiple mechanisms to achieve initial infection, and then they will try multiple ways to achieve persistence of connection, and then they will try multiple ways to ensure that that successful infection maintains its relevance by keeping it updated with the latest and greatest attack vectors that can be used on the device that's been infected. So it's exactly the same as Chrome updating itself, as Microsoft Office updating itself. The software will update itself to give itself new capabilities and new opportunities for revenue to be generated to those attackers. And that is just where the industry is going. We can go to the next slide, please. Just to sort of finish that point off, really, I wanted to call out one thing that really, I guess, focuses the mind. That's the illustration on the top right-hand corner there, bug bounty. Now, for those of you who might not be aware, bug bounty is nothing more than a manufacturer of a piece of software offering the wider public a reward for if a member of the public finds a vulnerability in the software from that manufacturer, responsibly discloses it to said manufacturer, giving the manufacturer time to fix that software bug before announcing that there's a vulnerability and announcing that there's a patch, and then the person who discovered that vulnerability gets a monetary reward. Ransomware groups are now doing that. Malware groups are now doing that. They are literally saying, please help us make our ransomware better quality, and we will reward you with up to $1 million. Now, do we think they're going to pay anyone $1 million? Probably not. But the point is, they've come out publicly and they've said, if you as a programmer help make our software better, we will give you money. That's pretty blatant. It's very arrogant, but the point is, it's there. And I think that will drive. And what, again, we're seeing attack groups. Last year, we saw them start to split up code development and issue code fragments to individual contractors. Those individual contractors would then complete that statement of work, deliver the code to the group that contracted them. That group would then assemble all the code fragments and then have an attack. Point being, all of the developers that had developed those individual code fragments wouldn't necessarily have any idea what they were doing. Only the attack group that created those individual statements of work and then assembled them into a finished product would actually know what the purpose was. We're seeing more of that as we go into 2023. And I think, there's a whole load of other stuff. I think we're going to send a copy of these slides out afterwards. But I think, Paul, Norm have got some experience with the Lockbit group.
Yeah. So quite interesting. We were engaged in a cert back in March 22. Which actually, as it transpired, was a Lockbit ransomware attack, we were in the environment. We were in the process of locking them out. So the attackers were unable to complete the attack, shall we say? So they started the exfiltration of files, saw us starting to close the net, and then hit the big red panic button. Which the impact for the end organization was all of the servers got cryptoed and a few of the workstations got cryptoed, but luckily they had quite a robust backup regime, so they were able to recover. Took the organization from an IT perspective offline for about 14 days, but operationally they served the consumers directly. They were able to actually keep the organization running. So it was interesting, but the devastation and the speed of these things, actually when you see it firsthand, is absolutely scary. Absolutely scary. And what's quite important, interesting, is because everyone started to adopt this as a service model. They actually have support desks as a service that actually will put a lot of IT companies to shame, because they answer the phone within 3 rings. They're very polite, very courteous, give you accurate commands on how to deliver or how to pay the ransom. And again, it's just that defragmentation of the service, which is one, making it a lot harder to track, but also a lot easier for organizations to actually leverage and to make the damage.
And I think one of the examples it talks about Somnia, and it talks about the situation in Ukraine. In 2022, we saw a dramatic increase in the number of wiper pieces of ransomware that ultimately encrypted the drive and then deleted the drive or portions of it, but still asked for a ransom to be paid. We're seeing more of that in 2023 as the conflict continues. We're seeing, that sort of number of deliberate, destructive ransomware continue to skyrocket. We're also seeing, to go back to the earlier point, where unskilled people have the ability to generate code. We're seeing with the likes of ChatGPT, the AI chatbot that's all over the news at the moment, we're seeing that being used to generate code. Now, it doesn't necessarily generate great code. We're also seeing, and certainly we saw this toward the latter part of 2022, we're seeing attackers generate ransomware that, whilst it does successfully manage to encrypt a device when it achieves successful infection, one example we saw, they forgot to put the link in as to how to pay the ransom. So basically, you were sort of screwed. So yeah, it's again, it all plays to, how do we fix this? And clearly there are solutions, but ransomware, as Paul has said, it's, we've been talking about it for years. It's not going away. It's just getting cleverer or more destructive.
Yeah.
Go to the next slide, please. So every year, Fortinet do a set of sort of statements on what we saw the previous year, and we theorize what we're going to see in the current year. And indeed, we've done that with our recently released cyber threat predictions for 2023. So what did we see sort of in terms of summary last year? We saw a lot of ransoms still being paid. So this is still a very, very lucrative industry for groups to be in. We saw, that number surmount the overall amount that had been paid in the previous decade, which I think is a pretty sobering number to talk about. As I've already said, we saw a lot of, ransomware that was wiper ransomware, that was deliberately destructive, to deliberately take devices offline, deliberately disrupt operations. And I've already mentioned about the bad coding, where there were examples where you couldn't pay the ransom because they hadn't built that notification into the code. But what are we estimating we're going to see as we move into sort of the latter parts of 2023? We're already seeing it, more wiper-based malware, more deliberately destructive malware. Paul's alluded to this too, more crime as a service, because we do love an acronym in our industry, don't we? So let's make a new one up. Crime as a service, CAS. Ultimately driving, as it says there, quicker paydays. We're going to see more machine learning used in moving money around between crypto assets, moving it into real money at the end, which is obviously the end game for the attackers. We're going to see maybe less human money mules and more machine learning based money mules to allow that money to be moved much more quickly, and therefore make it more difficult for law enforcement to track it, which of course then makes it more attractive for the attack groups, because the risk of them being prosecuted and discovered is lowered based upon the machine learning and the speed with which they can move that money around. Reconnaissance as a service, I think, is interesting, because again, to go further on from the previous point, which is that we're seeing the code fragments being distributed to different coders as work packages. We're estimating we're going to see more reconnaissance as a service used by the attack groups, where they will say to a service provider, please will you scope out the following potential attack targets, tell me all of their weak points, tell me all the possible attack areas that I can focus on, and ultimately accelerate my attack and increase my chance of success, because you paid someone else to do the groundwork for you, and therefore you can focus your attention on what's going to give you the biggest and quickest payday. So we're estimating more of that. Deepfake use. Deepfake, of course, it's been talked about a lot for a number of years now, but let's just put it into reality. What is to stop an attacker using deepfake software, let's just say audio to start with, recording a company's annual accounts call to the analysts, sampling the CFO and the CTO and the CEO's voices for long enough to be able to then get them to say whatever they want them to say, and then wrapping that into a social engineering and spear phishing campaign. There is nothing to stop them doing that, and we've already seen examples of that. And deepfake, that's just audio. Of course, it's possible to do, of course, a lot more now. As Moore's law shows no sign of going away or waning, then the ability to do video-based deepfakes, I think, is going to continue to be on the up. And quantum computing, no presentation in modern day would be complete without at least the word quantum to be used once. So what do we think quantum computing is potentially going to be used for? And that's for the discovery of zero-day vulnerabilities. Our theory here is that if you aim quantum computing at software application code of publicly available applications that are being used across the world, then the computational power of quantum should theoretically be able to discover zero-day vulnerabilities more quickly, which therefore translates into more zero-day attacks being made possible by the application of quantum to start with. So yeah, quite a scary situation, but clearly there are solutions. So if we move to the next slide, please. Now that everyone is not going to sleep tonight, let's not forget that the actual journey hasn't changed. The threats are evolving. The number of people that are able to attack is increasing, but the journey is still the same. And that very much goes back to the good old Lockheed Martin kill chain that's been around for quite a number of years. And I love this because at the end of the day, to my mind, it demystifies a lot of what our industry is famous for complicating. And that is, what is the journey that an attacker will take to start and to end in order to achieve their stated objectives? And it always comes down to this journey at whatever point you interject, but it's cyclical. You find out what's available, you find out what's vulnerable, you weaponize that knowledge, you then look to successfully deliver what you've weaponized. That delivery then seeks to achieve successful infection installation, which then achieves persistence, so it dials back to its boss, if you like, and then you get cyclical activity as that successful infection continues to update itself and receive instructions to do what it was intended to do. It's just a common sense project management approach, and that remains as valid today as it was when it was originally created. I mean, clearly the gamut of relevance has expanded to cover, as it says at the bottom of the slide, whether it's cloud, whether it's on the network or whether it's down at the endpoint, but that journey remains the same. It's all about understanding, weaponizing the knowledge, and then delivering that in a successful way to achieve persistence. Next slide, please. So let's just Paul mentioned ISO 27001 and its love child as well. Let's talk about a little bit more sort of legislation that I think is driving activity and behavior in the cyber industry. One example is DORA, the Digital Operational Resilience Act. Now, this is a European law that, as the illustration on the right-hand side attests to, is clearly being replicated in the UK with slightly different timescales. But what's the purpose of this? The purpose of this act is to force financial institutions and the whole sort of financial service industry to be resilient, so that all of us as consumers, whenever we look to pay with our card, as we're seeing a cashless society become more of a reality in the foreseeable future, that means that all of the contactless payments that we just expect to work on 24/7, 365 basis have to work on a 24/7, 365 basis, or we're going to not be able to pay for a train ticket, or etc., etc. So the DORA Act has a number of, it's about 173 pages last time I looked. It's a riveting read, thoroughly recommend it. If anyone can't sleep, read the DORA. It's got a lot of very interesting content in it, but as you can see, what I've done here is I've taken a few extracts of some of the paragraphs across those pages, and it comes to my mind down to that little bit that's highlighted in red in the center. It makes it mandatory for companies that are processing and offering capability associated with financial transactions, it makes it mandatory for them to be preventative, detect scenarios, be able to respond, and crucially be able to recover. And I think that's an interesting set of statements, because to my mind that reinforces the fact that they acknowledge that there will be successful attacks. Otherwise, why would you have a recovery statement in a piece of legislation? And I think we're going to see more of this type of legislation or guidance spread across every industry that has a capability that is increased or delivered via the internet. So I think, yeah, DORA, whilst it's only aimed at fintech, the reality is it hits the entire supply chain.
Yeah, and I think that's the important point there is the supply chain piece. You know, you can just see these controls being forced out from financial organizations to, you know, members of the supply chain, and there are numerous examples where legislation has started in financial verticals and then distilled into other verticals as well at the end of the day. And the really important and interesting point is there, and we'll touch upon it later as well, is the assumed breach piece these days. So, you know, it's not as, you know, if we are going to be attacked and if we are going to be breached, it's more the when that's going to happen, and therefore preparing for the when at the end of the day.
So let's just talk quickly about Zero Trust. Again, we both mentioned it in over the recent minutes, but Zero Trust, at the end of the day, it goes back a little bit to that Lockheed Martin kill chain illustration. The basic concept is very, very simple: least privilege. Make sure that at every single point that a user is interacting with a system, with data, with a company, that they only have access for the period of time they need it, if it's appropriate to give it to them based upon where they are, what they're using, and who they are, and all the other associated things, time of day, geo, etc., etc. So I think that's the basic concept of Zero Trust. And again, what we're finding certainly a lot of Fortinet customers are doing is they're now starting to either broach the concept of putting this in, or they're actually putting it in. And one of the benefits of, I suppose, what we have is that the existing FortiGate customers and the existing FortiClient customers that we have already got the building blocks for Zero Trust. They don't need to buy anything else. They've already got Zero Trust capability, because that's built into our client and it's built into our gate infrastructure already as a, you know, basically a code upgrade. And then it's a policy statement that you would make within the associated management infrastructure. So we're seeing Zero Trust, you know, it's not a silver bullet. It is a component part of an overall cyber approach, because at the end of the day, yes, Zero Trust will dramatically drop your risk window, but it's not going to remove it completely. You still need to supplement it with all of the other cyber controls that we're used to, you know, on an operational basis.
Thank you. So moving forward and touching upon the subject of cyber insurance. So as I mentioned at the start, the costs for securing cyber insurance is increasing. And looking at the industry and some of the publications out there, that trend is expected to continue for at least the next 2 years or so. And it's not surprising. It's not surprising the premiums are increasing. If you looked at the loss ratios for the last published set, which was H2 2001, the loss ratios were ranging from 67% up to greater than 100%. So they're actually losing money on the cybersecurity insurance premiums that are being laid out today. So costs are going to increase. Coupled with that as well is, you know, the insurance companies are starting to understand what the risk is they're trying to insure. And I think that was the biggest problem with the cybersecurity insurance market, was they couldn't truly quantify what the risk is they were trying to protect. So with that, the level of cover in just a simple fiscal value is contracting. So they're offering less cover for more money, and the exclusion list is also growing as well. There's some simple exclusions, such as if the application isn't protected by MFA, then it's game over. Our friends Lloyds, wherever they are on the other side of the building, I think, obviously put out that list that if it's associated with a nation state, then the insurance premium will also be null and void, kind of like your home insurance with an act of God statement at the end of the day. Securing the cover is also becoming more and more challenging as well. I don't know if anyone has recently tried to secure cybersecurity insurance, but the list of questions that come from the various insurers, whether it's the underwriter or the broker, vary from week to week, just as they're trying to hone and define a model which allows them to effectively quantify what that risk looks like. And it's fragmented across the industry. There's no two insurance companies that are using a common framework at the end of the day. What they are doing, which is also quite interesting at the moment, is they are starting to mandate certain technical controls within the insurance policies. So one of the big trends that we've seen over the last 6 months, and we expect to see throughout 2023, is they are mandating that you must have an EDR client on those endpoint devices that are being protected, as well as making sure you've got MFA on admin accounts and on cloud accounts as well. Couple all of that together, customers are starting to question the true value of the cybersecurity insurance premium, and what we're seeing in the market is a greater trend in the self-insure approach. So rather than using that sum of cash for the insurance, let's invest that back into the cybersecurity program that we've got. The facts are, it's currently a £9.9 billion revenue market. That's expected to more than double by 2027, so it's here to stay. And I think one thing that will absolutely change over the next 12-24 months is making the insurance more attractive to the end customer. So take away this desire for organizations to self-insure. That could be through regulation, it could be through compliance, harmonization of policies, of controls that they need implemented, but it's here to stay at the end of the day. So what we're advising organizations to do is get on the front foot for this. If you can clearly demonstrate to insurers that you are a safe bet, then actually what that should hopefully allow you to do is drive down your costs, because you are in control and you can quantify what the risks are within your organization. And a few of the points up there, it's just the normal cybersecurity hygiene factors. So make sure you're promoting a education campaign across your organization. Make sure that's recorded across all of the users. Make sure your users understand what phishing is, what the wider social engineering threat looks like as well. To Chris's point as well, hybrid working, remote working, that whole evolution, having common sense and basic cybersecurity hygiene at home is just as important as it is when you're in the office as well. So making sure that information is available to the users at home, it can be distilled across your social sphere as well to partners, children, parents, etc., is also important. Constantly understanding and maintaining and managing what your attack surface looks like on a daily basis is absolutely imperative. 0 days come out, vulnerabilities come out. There was a recent alert which came out earlier this week, actually, around how ESXi is once again being leveraged in common attack planes. This is an old vulnerability. It's a vulnerability that dates back to 2021. Patch has been available since 2021. However, attackers are still able to exploit the attack plane because people don't understand what the legacy and what the technical debt is within their organization. And then most importantly, the proactive and preventive monitoring of that environment 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
So EDR, I think, well, I don't know about everyone here, but I remember the days of getting a whole load of floppy disks and updating Dr. Solomon's on a number of devices, 3.5-inch floppy at a time. And of course, that was the old world, if you like, the old world of classic signature-based antivirus, personal firewall, etc. What we're seeing a lot of now, and this number dramatically increased certainly toward the latter sort of the second half of 2022, and we're already seeing it accelerate in the early part of 2023, is a complementary move, not getting rid of your classic endpoint protection solution, but adding in behavioral detection. I mean, partly it's driven by, as Paul was saying, the mandated behavioral protection for successfully getting cyber insurance for a business. But I think it's also deliberately going, sort of increasing in deployments because of the hybrid working, because of the risk associated with home working. I have regular heated conversations with friends that keep telling me they love working from home and they're saving their company money by not going into the office. And I often unsuccessfully, I might add, try to argue to them that the reality is the cost base for the employer is different if you're working from home, not necessarily less if you're working from home. But hey, if nothing else, it's a great conversation over a beer. But what we're seeing is the need for behavioral protection. It links into everything we've already talked about. It links into the destructive ransomware. It links into the ability for more people to create a successful attack with no skill sets. And crucially, it links into the ability for an organization to continue operating in the face of adversity. And I think, to my mind, that right point there, the whole remediate and roll back piece is critical, because we're seeing things like ransomware authors being really clever now, and some of the things we've seen toward the latter part of 2022 is where a ransomware author will create a piece of code that only encrypts the start and the end of each file. Okay, and that's, you think to yourself, well, surely that's okay. Well, it still makes the file unusable because you've encrypted the start and the end of it. So although the middle part is unencrypted, you've got no context to reuse that unencrypted part. Now, why would they do that? They do that for a number of reasons. One, it optimizes the computational load on the endpoint. And if the endpoint's doing less work, then the user's not going to perceive as much of a slowdown. So therefore, the user experience won't be impacted as much. So it will fly under the radar for longer. If you're running behavioral protection on that endpoint, there is a reasonable chance to believe that it won't detect that malicious activity for a little bit longer, because you're not fully encrypting files, and so you're reliant upon the behavioral sort of characteristics that are being trapped by that EDR solution down at the client level to trap it. So the point I'm making is that at some point a device will be encrypted, will be attacked successfully, and therefore it absolutely hinges on the ability to remediate and roll back and the ability to automate that. And that's why the EDR industry is incredibly competitive. I would say EDR and SIEM are the two most competitive industries in my experience within the cyber industry. Ask the question, can the EDR solution that you're looking at be able to successfully roll back, even if a piece of ransomware has got onto that end device, has started encrypting files? Can that EDR solution track it, stop it, unencrypt the files that have been encrypted, and return you to a pre-infection state automatically? And then to add to that, it's important to answer the question, how does it achieve that? Does it rely on, for example, the volume shadow copy that, say, Windows constantly maintains as one part of the disk? Because again, ransomware authors, the first thing they do is they look at all the connected disks, all the connected backup devices, they delete them or encrypt them, then they encrypt the local storage, and then they ask you for the ransom, because it's already at that point too late, because they've absolutely got you. So if you can have a solution that doesn't rely on those end sort of backup solutions being the source of the file unencrypt, then you're in a much better place. And so to my mind, the remediate and rollback, all the other stuff's important, but the remediate and rollback is the critical component. And certainly we're seeing clients move towards FortiEDR in order to allow them that level of flexibility and that level of comfort that then enables them to demonstrate to their insurance companies that they've chosen well and that their business is protected. Because to the self-insure piece that Paul talked to my mind, it doesn't really matter whether you've got insurance or not. It's much better to not damage your operations in the first place than have to make a claim. It's a bit like all of us having home contents insurance. We don't buy it because we want to claim on it. We buy it because we want to support net, but I guarantee we all still do everything we can on a daily basis to ensure we don't need to claim on it.
Yep.
Go to the next slide, please.
Yep. Deception. So, as part of the evolution of the Norm service stack, later this year, so by the end of H1 23, we'll be introducing deceptive technology into our service stack. Why deception? Well, the whole idea around deception has been around in many guises for, again, a long period of time. I think the IT industry is absolutely atrocious at taking an old idea, dusting it off, giving it a new name, and putting a few extra pound signs in front of it at the end of the day. But deception is actually, from a concept perspective, is very, very simple. It allows you to deploy deceptive decoys or lures within an IT environment, which under normal operational parameters shouldn't be touched. And what it allows you to do is build those lures in such a way that it looks like a standard piece of your infrastructure. It looks like a standard Windows 2016 server, 2019 server running a supported workload. So it allows to deceive both external and internal threats. It allows you to expose potentially malicious or nefarious activity within the environment right up front. And a lot of the time when you're in the defense side of the world, what you're trying to do is just get that early indication that something is happening within the environment. If you're doing that based upon your main production server, it's really hard to distinguish between a good SMB call and a potentially malicious SMB call, especially if it's an internal threat actor. If you've got lures that are sat there that shouldn't be touched and someone does, it gives you that ability to produce a high severity, basically an incident response alert within the SOC, and that investigation to start immediately. It also allows you to reduce the dwell time within the environment because you're getting that early alarm, and eliminate those threats because you can start chaining the response through the automated platform and the SOAR platform. The reason that we've chosen to work with Fortinet is, most importantly, it protects both the OT and the IT environments. And one of the things that we see accelerating over 23 and beyond is the consolidation of those IT and OT environments. That's either from a productivity perspective, or actually what we're seeing in the market is a lot of the hardware manufacturers and support organizations need to have access to those environments remotely to be able to keep them operationally. So one way or another, those IT worlds and those OT worlds are going to come together. And the FortiDeceptor platform allows us to have those lures both in the IT world as well as within the OT world with SCADA and ICS profiles as well. One of the big things that we were also very, very keen on when we introduced technology into customers' environments is that it's unintrusive, is that it's simple to deliver at the end of the day. So there's no need to take down any of the IT or OT systems to deploy the laws and the decoys, and there's no operational delay within deploying those environments as well. And again, what it absolutely gives us is early detection and the ability to drive that response. So high fidelity alerting, someone's touching a lure that they shouldn't be touching, that then allows the SOC to go into incident response mode straight away.
To make that real, I know this slide is very, very ugly, you realise that, but I think if nothing else, it creates a great opportunity for good talking points. So yes, as Paul was saying, if you look at the deception technology that we have available, and that Norm are building a service around, we can create decoys that look like everything you see on this slide. If there's something that isn't on the slide, we can create custom decoys that would replicate maybe a custom application that you're using in your businesses. But the angle here really is, as Paul was saying, it's about the time to detect and the time to remediate. So if you build decoys across your infrastructure, whether that's on your infrastructure, whether it's as you're moving a workload into the public cloud and you want to, as part of that project, build a number of decoys around that workload so you can get advanced sort of notification if you've made maybe a misconfiguration on the firewall in that cloud provider and someone manages to get into it. We've all seen reports about S3 buckets being misconfigured, etc. Then you have the ability to push a number of decoys at incredibly low cost around your infrastructure to drive that critical metric of time to detect down. Because if someone touches a decoy, that is a P1. However you look at it, that's a P1. We put deception in for a large organization late last year, and a couple of days after we put it in for them, they called us up. It was a proof of concept. They called us up and they said, one of our servers is talking to the HP printer decoy that we stood up. Now, that wasn't malicious activity. What that actually showed was that there was a misconfiguration on the server and that some JetDirect software had been left on the server. So the server was constantly polling the network, which they weren't aware of, looking on port 9100 for JetDirect cards. And that showed that they needed to rebuild that server because, of course, they were more vulnerable as a result of a misconfiguration. And that server, I would argue, a server should never be reaching out to anything. So it's not just about malicious activity, it's also an opportunity to show misconfiguration too, wherever that might be. And as you can see, we can do cloud decoys across the 3 major cloud providers. The way we've done that is that it minimizes the transactional cost in the cloud provider because the actual decoy lives on the deception appliance or VM, and it creates a custom tunnel, secure tunnel into a minimum viable platform in the cloud provider. So from an OpEx perspective, it's cost effective, but from the value it adds, it's maximized. And you can see on the OT side, we do a whole load of IoT and OT based devices. We can do insulin infusion pump decoys that look and feel like an insulin infusion pump because there've been a number of vulnerabilities on manufacturers that offer those that could result in a risk to life. Either a hypo or a hyper could be induced as a result of someone playing with an infusion pump in a hospital. And in fact, last Friday, there was another ransomware infection in a hospital in the US that took them offline. That was in the press early this week. You can see, to Paul's earlier point, we can build replica ESXi servers. And again, with no disrespect intended to VMware, because it's complex software, there have been a number of vulnerabilities over 2022 where an ESXi server could be successfully compromised. So why wouldn't you, alongside your production system, build a decoy that looked and felt like a backup system, because it will get touched by an attacker if they get onto your internal net, when they get onto your internal network. And as you can see, everything we talked about SMB, we talked about Windows. There's a whole load. I mean, IP cameras is one to call out on the IoT decoys, because the Mirai botnet that was used to bring a service provider down in 2018, that's still very much alive. CCTV cameras from a variety of manufacturers are still being compromised on a daily basis, and they are being used as staging points. So why wouldn't you build absolutely compelling camera decoys in your network with realistic looking video footage on there to help create dwell time from the attacker's perspective, so you get more information about what they're trying to do on your network. And to that dwell time point that Paul made, again, one of the things I think that is a side value of a decoy is that if you get a ransomware infection, you are more sure as to whether it was or wasn't a diversionary tactic, because if you've got decoys around your network, you clear up the ransomware infection, but actually the attackers managed to get a persistent infection somewhere else on your network, and 6 months later they activate it and they start polling and looking for vulnerabilities. Your decoy network, your whole deception approach and strategy is going to pay dividends there, because it's going to catch that dwell time immediately, and you're going to drop the time to detect down to, absolutely minimal levels that will allow you to make better decisions in a more appropriate fashion, rather than running around in a way where you're out of control.
Yeah, and dwell times have dropped massively. So a couple of years ago now, average dwell times would have been, 100 plus 200 days on average. Dwell times now are sub 30 days. Yeah, and actually we're seeing them on the incident responses that we're working on, they're less than a week. Yeah, and again, it comes around to the point we made earlier around ransomware and crime as a service. It's a business. Yeah, they want to get their hands on the cash as quickly as they possibly can. So waiting 3/4 of a year to try to get a return on it, doesn't work for these guys. So it's much more a get in, get hold of the assets, crypt the data, and then straight back out. So reducing that detection time is absolutely imperative at the end of the day.
So the final point worth making, we talked about reconnaissance as a service being estimated as being used by the attack groups much more as we go through 2023. So if they're using it, we've got to use it. So reconnaissance is available, and what can it help you with? It can tell you whether you've made some misconfigurations on your cloud infrastructure or your internet facing assets. Maybe you've left some ports open that you shouldn't have done. So it can help you restrict your vulnerability very quickly. It can tell you if your user ID database and password hash database is for sale on the dark web, which would point to a previously successful exfiltration, which will inform you to make different decisions in a more informed way. It can tell you if your websites have been copied and are being used in a spear phishing campaign to direct your customers to the copy and therefore potentially damage your reputation. It can tell you if your app store contributions, your applications you've developed for the likes of Android phones or Apple devices, if they've been copied, and maybe they've been copied, your website's been copied, there's a spear phishing campaign that ties all that together. And again, the whole combination of that could cause massive brand reputational damage to your business if your customers are successfully directed to those copies. It can tell you if they're on the dark web is evidence of an attack being planned against your company. And again, that allows you to make take offensive measures rather than reactive measures. So all of that ultimately is telling you what you could never know outside of your network, because everything I think our industry has focused on since the beginning of time is understanding and controlling your own destiny within the confines of what you define as your network. Now, clearly that network has expanded. We all know the perimeter's gone. We're in a hybrid working environment, but we all still talk about the controllable assets, getting visibility of those assets, getting policy around those assets, getting reporting around those assets. What we generally don't talk about is the external threat profile, and that's where reconnaissance is going to add massive value to ultimately allow organizations to understand what they previously wouldn't have done, so they can make better decisions to then control the risk on their internal manageable networks.
Perfect. So in summary, I apologize for running a little bit late. So obviously over the last hour we've discussed threat actors continue to evolve, and I think for the next 12 months and beyond, whilst there is an opportunity to make money in cyber crime, the threat actors will continue to evolve. Deception is a viable mechanism to reduce that dwell time and to get the early indicators of a potential compromise. Behavioural protection is now critical. I said that's definitely a trend that the insurance companies are enforcing, and it's something that we've had in our toolkit now for the last 4 years or so. Automation is key, from both a service provider perspective, but also as a recipient of that service, because it drives efficiencies, it drives a predictable outcome at the end of the day as well. Integration and visibility is a must, again, both from the service provider as well as from the recipient of the service. You've got to understand what your attack surface looks like, how the alarms are being handled, how the incidents are being managed, and that communication flow. So absolute visibility and transparency is also very, very important. Threat intelligence is a term that gets bounded around the industry, very, very frequently. But I think what's really important is making sure that threat intelligence, and in fact just intelligence in general, is contextual. It's relevant to you as an organisation, us as a country, and how that threat is starting to evolve. So being able to provide some context around the threat intelligence is absolutely important. Security awareness, is a high priority. The layer 8 interface, the human interface, us, the people around the table on this webinar, ensuring that everybody is aware of the risks and the proactive steps that they can take, and sometimes just the simple steps that they can take. Normally, just count to 10. A lot of things are reliant upon memory muscle. So one of the common attack paths that were taken over 2022 is exploiting MFA. So MFA became the gold standard for securing apps, and attackers realised that. And I'm not sure how your organisation implements MFA, but a lot of organisations were just pushing out the prompt: do you allow access, or do you rescind access? And 9 times out of 10, as humans, you get a pop come up on your MFA phone, you just click the approve button without actually thinking, did I just ask for that MFA token to be pushed out to the phone? Interestingly, Microsoft are enforcing a new update as of the end of the month, where they're stopping the push notifications globally across the platform, and they're going to go to number matching. So what you'll do is you'll get a push to the phone which says, does this number match what's on your screen? So again, it's just trying to break that automatic memory muscle: stop, think, then take an action. To Chris's point, understanding what the external attack surface can allow you to drive better posture internally as well. And most importantly, over the course of the next 12 months and beyond, is driving down that mean time to detect, and most importantly, the mean time to restore. So if we take the approach that assume breach, you've got to make sure you've got a robust business continuity disaster recovery in place, and that is practiced. You're able to do restores, you're able to get the operation up and running as quickly as possible. Chris, anything you'd like to interject, sir?
No, I mean, hopefully, I'm conscious, we have got a bit over time. No one has run out screaming, which is always a good sign. So yeah, hopefully that was useful, and we're around. So if there are any questions, please let us know, because I think maybe the final point worth making is that cybersecurity is a really tough industry. I think personally, if you don't have a passion for it, if you're not interested in it, it's very, very difficult to talk about it in an informative way. I like working with Norm. One, they wear very bright shirts, and that keeps you awake. But two, I love the fact that they've made something that ultimately, to go to the sort of the tagline that Norm have, it is quite dull, as an industry. I mean, ultimately what we're trying to do is make sure organizations can just do what they're existing to do, and not worry about all the other stuff. But I think having a passion to want to keep understanding what the latest threats are, so that ultimately we can be informed, we can make an appropriate decision. That's what Norm do, that's what Fortinet do, that's what the industry does in general, and hopefully we've managed to communicate a little of that today.
Thank you, everyone. Were there any questions from the webinar at all? Any questions around the table, gents?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone.